Of Isaiah chapter 26, making our way slowly through Isaiah on Wednesday nights. And if you recall, at the end of Isaiah chapter number 26, there seems to be a little bit of room there for a reference to the rapture. Now, normally we say that the rapture was a mystery in the Old Testament, and so it's very well that it's not a reference to the rapture, but we could certainly apply it because at the end of the 26th chapter, it says, "Come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thee, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation be overpast." And whether he's simply talking about people going into a safe place to pray, like the temple or a cave, until the difficulty passes by in that ancient day, or if we could perhaps apply it to the rapture of the church, when indeed there will be great tribulation on the earth, but will be snatched away for those 7 years until the indignation is past, and then we'll come back down to earth for the millennial kingdom. And that's what Isaiah 27 is all about, is the coming millennial kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ. So it fits well if at the end of the 26th chapter we have a reference to the rapture, which we know will then lead into the tribulation and then bring about the second coming and the millennial kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ. So let's read a little bit of Isaiah chapter 27. It says this in verse 1, "In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan the piercing serpent, even Leviathan that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. In that day sing ye unto her a vineyard of red wine." So just read those two verses, and you can see that each of them begin the same way. In that day, talking about the day that follows the events of chapter 24, 25, and 26, which have to do with the tribulation and the coming indignation on the earth and the wrath of God. And so we're talking about the time of tribulation and the millennial kingdom. And during that time, it says there's going to be a great punishment of Leviathan and a vineyard of red wine. Both these give us the idea that Christians have a lot to look forward to. I know that there is great hope for the future, and we all have a tremendous outlook as believers because we know there's the rapture of the church, the second coming of Christ, the millennial kingdom, all the rewards, and the complete transformation of the world that we live on. So there is a lot to look forward to, and Isaiah 27 gives us some insight into what the millennial kingdom is going to be like. And I actually like that in chapters 24, 25, 26, and 27, which are all about the tribulation and the millennium, 3 of those chapters are about the millennium, but only 1 is about the tribulation, which is a good ratio because we know that the millennium is much longer than the tribulation. The tribulation is only 7 years long. The millennium is 1,000 years long. And I did some mathematics for tonight. That's 143 times longer. So it's nice to see it represented here in Isaiah. 3 chapters on the millennium, only 1 chapter on the tribulation. And I think that's the way it's going to go with our suffering in the future. We're going to look back, it's going to be just a momentary thing, and what is really going to last is the joy of the Lord. Now, look at what happens in that day, according to verse number 1. In that day, here's a violent reptile. Leviathan is going to be destroyed, verse number 1 says. Now, I'm not sure what you believe about this Leviathan. It says that it is a piercing serpent, a crooked serpent, a slaying dragon that's in the sea. So there are 3 interpretations at least for this Leviathan, which is mentioned in Job and other places. You might have heard of it before. Some think it's just mythology. In fact, a lot of people think the whole Bible is mythology. So they say when it talks about Noah and the ark, or Jonah and the whale, or Leviathan, they say that's all just a story. Now, I don't believe that the Bible is just a story. I believe it's the inspired, inerrant, infallible word of the living God. If we reject that interpretation, which I do, then that leaves us with it being a literal sea creature, which is very possible that in ancient times, or maybe in the future, there will be this horrible sea creature that will do tremendous damage to huge populations. I can see that being possible in the past, and certainly we know from Revelation the things that take place. There could be some horrible sea creature literally come out of the earth someday. Or the third interpretation is that it's a representation of evil, Satan, or the Antichrist, maybe all three. We know in Revelation 13, Antichrist comes out of the sea. So maybe this is a representation during the tribulation of Antichrist coming out and doing his damage. I see no reason why it couldn't be a combination of the last two interpretations. It could be a literal sea creature, which also represents Antichrist, Satan, and evil in general. There could have been one of these creatures years ago, and now Isaiah is using it as an example for what Antichrist is going to be like in the future. Whatever the interpretation, you notice that God is more powerful, and that's the main message here, is that God is stronger and he destroys, punishes, and slays this sea creature with his great and terrible sword. So I like to imagine that you can think of the worst thing that comes to mind. I mean, a terrible sea creature coming down on you. And God is stronger than whatever you can imagine. The worst thing that you can imagine, this horrible creature coming out of the sea, swallowing up whole towns and villages, God is stronger than that. God is more powerful than anything that we will face or come across. He has so much power, it will never be exhausted. I was thinking earlier when I was preparing this lesson about the Great Lakes up in Ontario. There's 5 of them. Some of you have probably seen or been on a few of them. I've been on Lake Ontario. My brother has a boat and lives in Toronto, and he used to take us every once in a while around the harbor and go out on Lake Ontario. I've also been on Lake Huron, which is a very interesting place because we take mission trips to Manitoulin Island. Had a great missionary there named Shirley Hamilton with State Daystar Ministries. And Manitoulin Island is one of the only places in the world where you can be on an island, in a lake, on an island, in a lake. And those Great Lakes are huge. The biggest one, do you know all their names? There's Erie, Michigan, Superior, Huron, and Ontario. And the biggest one is, Lake Superior is the biggest. They say that 10% of the world's fresh water is in Lake Superior. Altogether, 21% of the world's fresh water is in the 5 Great Lakes. They are so big that I was looking at some statistics. Apparently, there are 6 quadrillion gallons of water in the 5 Great Lakes. Now, a quadrillion is the number that comes after a trillion. So you get a trillion, and then you get 1,000 more of those, right? So a billion, 1,000 of a billion is a trillion, 1,000 of a trillion is a quadrillion. And this is 6 quadrillions, the gallons of water that's in there. I just did a little bit of figuring. There would be enough water, fresh water, for every human on the planet, if my math is correct, and math is in my name, so hopefully it's correct. There's enough fresh water in the 5 Great Lakes. We can't distribute it all to them easily, but for every human to have 30 gallons of water every day of their life for 70 years. Everybody on the earth could have 30 gallons of water every day for 70 years just out of the Great Lakes, and that's only 20% of the fresh water that's on the earth. So there's so much water on the earth. You could never exhaust it. I could never use it all. I could fill every swimming pool that I ever came across and never drain the world of its water. And I'd like to compare that to God's strength, his power, his ability, his might. I could never exhaust the power of God. No matter how many troubles I've had, how often I've asked him for strength, how many times this week I asked him to help me, and how many other people on the planet are asking for his help right now, he's got lots. So no matter what you're up against, a horrible sea creature, even the Antichrist himself, the Lord can slay them with his sword. It's a great little lesson here. Now, the other lesson is in verse 2, in that day, that's in the millennium, we are going to have a vineyard of red wine. So we got a violent reptile and a vineyard of red wine. And that's a picture of Israel. And you can see that here as you go down through the chapter. You could also go back to Isaiah 5 and see the same thing, that Israel is compared to God's vineyard. So let's just end by talking about grapes and vines and vineyards and how they represent the nation of Israel. And it's a really good way to represent Israel. We have lots of good representations here in Canada. For example, if you think of Canada, you might think of beavers or maple syrup or maple leaves. And why do we have those things as representatives of Canada? Because there's so many of them. So many maple leaves, beavers, maple syrup. Our nation is just overrun with these things. So they're good examples of Canada, or symbols for Canada. It's the same in the U.S. An eagle, baseball, apple pie. These are good representations of the United States of America. Or maybe more recently, Walmart, Amazon, Tesla, Google. Maybe these are the things that represent the strength of America now. I don't know. But in Israel, everywhere you went, there were vines and grapes and vineyards and men out in their fields working. Everywhere that you went, there was so much of it that it was common in the life of the people of Israel to have grapes, wine, vineyards, working in the fields, everywhere that you went in the Promised Land. So it became a symbol for the nation of Israel. But more than just the plenty of these things, think about the comparison between grapes and Israel and the Promised Land and vineyards. I mean, it started out in Numbers 13, you might remember, when the 12 spies went into the land. They said that the Promised Land had grapes that were so plenteous and full that they could carry a cluster of grapes between two men. Massive amounts and sizes, a gift from God to the people. But even more than that, vines and most plants can be transported from one place to another or transplanted. You can take a little clipping off, maybe some of you have done that this spring. Take a little clipping from one plant and put it over here. Take a hosta or divide a hosta here, put the other half of it over there. That's exactly what Israel's a vineyard, because God took a clipping, right? He took the nation of Israel out of Egypt. He uprooted them from Egypt, put them down in the Promised Land, across the Red Sea, through the wilderness. He uprooted them like a vineyard or a vine and put them down in new land over in the Promised Land. Furthermore, Israel is very stony, so it's going to take a lot of effort to get the vineyard in any kind of a condition to plant and grow grapes. So you've got to really work at it to get this thing to grow and to produce any fruit. We'll read the Old Testament, look at all the effort God put into, and the New Testament with us, the amount of effort God puts into his people and the preparation that's been done in order to get any amount of spiritual fruit out of us and into the world. So it's a good comparison between the vineyard, the vines, the grapes, the wine, and the people of Israel. Further, grapes can easily be trampled. And so you see like the Assyrians and the Babylonians trampling Israel all the time, just going through and beating them down like you would just through a vineyard. All the blood spilling out of the people, the grapes being crushed and the blood coming up on the skirts of the people. Good similarities between vineyards, vines, grapes, and Israel. Plus, there's constant pruning that's necessary. Thieves often invade and steal or damage the vines. Grapes need to be taken care of gently, guarded, protected, and they're greatly enjoyed by their owners. Any fruit that you receive from any garden, basically, it's the same. Whether you like tomatoes or cucumbers or grapes or whatever you've planted and are growing, it's great to get the enjoyment out of those things at the end of the year. And God is going to get a lot of enjoyment out of his family being together one day in heaven. And so he tends his vineyard. He protects it. He guards it. He helps it. And he corrects the people who are in it. So all of these things are pictures of Israel. And in John 15, of course, we have that wonderful line about Jesus being the true vine and we being the branches. So in the Old Testament, it's a good picture of Israel. Ultimately, it's a great picture of Christ. And really, when you think about it, what a humble way for the King of the universe to present himself as a common, ordinary vine. Just a simple vine. And that's how he came into the world, as a little baby, as a common man, no different than anyone else except without sin. And yet he's grown, of course, to bring salvation to the whole world and spiritual fruit through us. So if you go back to Isaiah 27, we'll just finish off here. In verse 6, you see this fruit filling the whole world. And one day that will happen in the millennial kingdom. Righteousness will cover the earth as the waters as the seas cover the earth. And then there's a couple of other neat little phrases I wanted you to pick up here. Look, for example, in verse 5. I really like the phrase, "Let him take hold of my strength, that he may make peace with me, and he shall make peace with me." So here's an invitation from the Lord. Take my strength. I mean, we talked about all the water in the Great Lakes. Can't be exhausted by anyone. God has all this power. He says, you take my strength. Take hold of it. And that word take hold is the same as the angels that took hold of Lot in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah and just they seized him and pulled him and his family out of Sodom. And God says, in the same way, enthusiastically, boldly, firmly, take hold of my strength. Which is great when you're drowning and a boat comes by or somebody throws a lifesaver to you. Grab onto it. And that's what the Lord invites all of us to do, is to take hold of his strength if we are weak and needy. And then the last couple of phrases that I'll show you here is that in verse number 7, it asks a question, "Hath he smitten him as he smote those that smote him?" So here God's talking, of course, about the Assyrians or the Babylonians smiting Israel and asking, does he smite his people in the same way that he smites those who don't believe? And no, his grace, as a father, he chastens his children. So he may chastise you, he will chastise you, and it will hurt, but it won't hurt as much as if you were unsaved and in hell forever. And then finally in verse 10, you see all of these defense cities desolate. And in verse 11, the boughs are withered and broken off. And this, of course, is a symbol of the world system, which one day will be completely destroyed. And there will be nothing to hang on to. He asks us early in the chapter, hang on to my strength, because there's coming a day when there will be nothing else. All the trees of the field, all the world systems and institutions will be broken and cast down, and there'll be nothing to hang on to. So today, let's not hang on to anything other than Jesus. He's what will always be there to be held on to. And you'll see as the chapter ends, a great gathering, calling them one by one, his little sheep as it were, into the pasture for the millennial kingdom. And I believe that the future holds rapture of the church, 7-year tribulation, second coming of Christ, and 1,000-year millennial kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ. And Isaiah 27 has just a little taste for us of what the millennium is going to be like And you can read more about it in Revelation chapter 20. Well, thank you. That's all the time that we have for our Bible lesson. And thanks to those who watched online, and Randy for arranging the online live stream for us. We'll say